Hello everyone, my name is Kiran Preet Kaur and my other group members are Harman Preet Kaur and Stinder Kaur, and our topic is physical activity and psychological well-being. So let's start with the introduction. It's proved by many researchers that physical activity improves the individual health and psychological well-being. This concept paper will focus on how physical activity affects the psychological well-being and determines the other factors which affect their relationship. For more understanding of independent variable and dependent variable, we reviewed a number of articles that are mentioned below. So let's start with the first article on dependent variable. So in the first article, the researchers take youngster participants to review tools and screening of literature, and the result shows that the COVID-19 affects the psychological well-being in a negative way. So our second article is about the psychological flexibility in psychological well-being by controlling confounding factors. It is performed on obese people, including male and female. Basically, it's about the gender participants. The result are consistent with the evidence that the psychological flexibility has strongly related to the psychological well-being. So our third article is about the psychological well-being, which is proved by many searches that the minority stressors, protective factors, and psychological well-being among the LGBT people. As a result, people discuss several negative experiences from their early childhood, adulthood, and later life that affect.
Now I am going to discuss more about our concept paper. So now I am going to discuss about the articles which we review to determine the relationship between physical activity and psychological health. In the first article, an online survey was held to examine whether the problem of sitting for long hours without any physical activity or exercise have negative effect on psychological well-being. In this survey, office workers were the participants, which were over the age of 55 years. Large proportion of participants shows no negative effect on them by sitting for long hours, but the research has some limitation. Maybe the data is inaccurate and small sample of participants is used in this research. These participants belong to only one university, so maybe further research is needed to prove these things more clearly. In second study, we determine the article to know about the self-connection. This study is to determine whether self-connection also helps to clarify the relationship between physical activity and both mental and psychological well-being or not. In the research, uh, at the end, the results suggested that regardless of how much or what type of activity in which participant engaged in, higher self-connection related to greater health and psychological well-being, which means that self-connection is directly related to psychological well-being and physical health. This research also have some limitation. The research was cross-sectional and only convenient sample techniques were used in this research. So more study is needed to understand the phenomena more clearly. In third study, the researcher discussed how COVID-19 affect the psychological well-being of older during quarantine. The finding and discussion suggested that the study was consistent in indicating that physical activity play a vital role in relationship between depression in older adults. Moreover, the result of study should be clearer because it is unknown how much cleanliness is harmful to health and the level of physical activity contributed to world health.
Starting the conceptual framework, and here the purpose of our study is to find out whether the physical activity relates to health and psychological well-being or not. For this study we are taking the overall rating of psychological health as our dependent variable, and meanwhile the intensity of the physical activity is an independent variable. And the theory related to our conceptual framework as the RIF 6-factor model of psychological well-being is used to measure psychological well-being. And the 6 factors are functioning autonomy, environmental mastery, personal growth, purpose in life, positive relationship with others, and self-acceptance. Self-acceptance or plays a major role in determining the relationship between physical activity and psychological well-being as mentioned above. So the function autonomy is related to the psychological well-being of the person as we discussed earlier in the study that sitting for a long time for in a job affect the well-being of a person in a negative way. So an individual psychological health is also dependent on the work he or she does in daily lives. As we know, people do more manual work during the day are more fit and active than the person who usually does sitting jobs for a longer hour and suffer from number of body problems. Now let's talk about the research problem. Our research question is, does physical activity relates to mental and physical psychological well-being and how other factors influence their relationship? Our hypothesis of the study is increased physical activity relates to an increased level of health and psychological well-being. So here are all the references of the article.